The glowing green clock on my dashboard read 11:58 p.m. My eyes felt like they were packed with sand. I had just finished a brutal, bone-grinding 14-hour shift, and my entire body was vibrating with that specific kind of exhaustion where even your teeth feel tired. All I wanted was a shower. All I wanted was to fall face first into my own mattress. I turned the corner onto my street in Scottsdale, Arizona, the headlights of my truck sweeping across the familiar beige stucco walls of Desert Mirage Estates. But instead of the open, welcoming entrance I had driven through that morning, I hit the brakes hard. The tires squealed against the hot asphalt. I stared through the windshield. My brain literally refused to process what it was seeing. Standing between the two brick entrance pillars was a massive, matte black, wrought-iron monstrosity. It was a brand new, dual-swing security gate, complete with spiked finials on top and a row of blindingly bright LED floodlights aimed directly at my retinas. It wasn't there at 9 a.m. Now, it was heavily fortifying my neighborhood, like a medieval castle preparing for a siege. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. The gate was still there. Have you ever felt that primal, lizard brain urge to just put your truck in four-wheel drive and test the structural integrity of a decorative piece of suburban metal? Because sitting there, baking in the residual 95-degree midnight heat, I was about 2 seconds away from doing exactly that. I put the truck in park and grabbed my sun visor, frantically clawing at the old plastic clicker clipped to it. I pointed it at the gate. I mashed the button. Once. Twice. 10 times. Nothing. Not even a click. I let out a slow, heavy breath, killed the engine, and stepped out into the muggy night air. The crickets were chirping loudly, mocking me. I walked up to the shiny new call box mounted on a freshly poured concrete pedestal. There was a piece of white printer paper taped over the screen. It was sealed in a plastic sheet protector. It read, in bold Comic Sans font, "Attention residents. The new fortress level security perimeter is now active. All old remotes have been deactivated. See HOA President Richard at the clubhouse. Tomorrow, between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., to purchase your new secure key fob. $150 exact change only." I stared at the paper. I read it again. My jaw actually tightened so hard it cracked. Richard. Of course it was Richard. The guy who wears mirrored aviators indoors and measures the height of people's front lawns with a wooden ruler. He had somehow managed to fast-track this gate project, completely bypass the usual neighborhood voting protocol, and lock me out of my own home in the middle of the night. I pulled out my phone. 12:03 a.m. I dialed the HOA's 24-hour emergency line. It rang 4 times before dropping to a heavily compressed, robotic voicemail. "Richard," I said to the answering machine, my voice low and dangerous. "It is past midnight. I am standing outside the new gate. My old clicker is dead. The keypad is taped off. There is no manual override. You are holding my house and my bed hostage. Call me back and open this thing immediately, or I am calling the police." I hung up. I waited 10 minutes. No call back. My phone buzzed in my hand with a text notification. I eagerly looked down, hoping it was an unlock code. It was an automated message from my cell provider telling me my data plan was almost up. "Perfect," I muttered. I dialed the non-emergency line for the Scottsdale Police Department. The dispatcher sounded just as tired as I was, but she promised to send a car out. 20 minutes later, a white SUV with blue and red lights flashing slowly rolled up behind my truck. 2 officers stepped out. One was a younger guy chewing gum like his life depended on it. The other was a tired-looking veteran who immediately looked annoyed that he had to get out of the air conditioning. "Evening," the older cop said, shining a painfully bright flashlight right into my face. "You the homeowner?" "I am," I said, shielding my eyes. Or at least I was, until Richard decided to build the Berlin Wall while I was at work. The younger cop chuckled. The older one didn't. "So what's the issue here?" the veteran asked, scanning the gate. "The issue is that I own the property on the other side of this metal barricade," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "The HOA president installed this today. Deactivated the old remotes, taped off the keypad, and went to sleep. I can't get in. I need you guys to either wake him up and make him open it, or give me permission to manually pry this thing open." The older officer sighed. He walked up to the gate, gave it a half-hearted push, and walked back. "Look, man," he said, hooking his thumbs into his tactical belt. "This is private property. It's an HOA road. That makes this a civil matter." "A civil matter?" I echoed, feeling the blood rush to my ears. "I am locked out of my own house. By a guy who doesn't even own my house." "Yeah, I get it. It sucks," the younger cop chimed in, popping a bubble with his gum. "But we can't force entry on a private gate unless there's a life-or-death emergency on the other side. And we definitely can't authorize you to damage it. You break that gate, I gotta arrest you for vandalism." "Can I hop the fence?" I asked, pointing to the 6-foot block wall flanking the gate. "I'll walk to my house." "Nope," the veteran cop said immediately. "The walls are an HOA easement. If you climb over, you're technically trespassing on community property to get to your private property. Given that you've already called us out here, if a neighbor sees you jumping the wall and calls it in, we have to come back and cite you." I stared at them. I was literally caught in a bureaucratic nightmare loop. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice getting dangerously quiet. "Sleep on the curb?" The older officer offered a sympathetic but entirely unhelpful shrug. "I'd suggest a motel, sir. Call your HOA guy in the morning. Have a good night." They got back in their cruiser. They turned off their flashing lights. They drove away, leaving me standing in the pitch black, completely alone. I didn't go to a motel. I refused to spend my own money because Richard was on a power trip. I walked back to my truck, climbed into the cab, reclined the driver's seat as far back as it would go, and locked the doors. It was miserable. The steering wheel dug into my knees. The streetlights glared through the windshield. Every time I drifted off, my neck would snap back and wake me up. But in that cramped, hot, uncomfortable truck cab, a cold, hard resolve started to solidify in my chest. Richard wanted to play games with my property access? Fine. I wasn't just going to get a new key fob in the morning. I was going to find a way to legally, permanently dismantle his shiny new toy. I was going to nuke this gate from orbit. The sun came up like a sledgehammer, blasting through the passenger window and cooking the inside of the truck. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. with a crick in my neck that felt like a knife wound. I peeled myself off the synthetic upholstery, grabbed a stale, half-empty bottle of water from the cup holder, and rinsed my mouth out. At exactly 7 a.m., the low rumble of a heavy diesel engine broke the quiet of the neighborhood. I sat up. An unmarked, heavily dented white utility van pulled up to the gate. 2 guys in high-visibility vests got out. They carried a massive spool of copper wire and a heavy-duty toolbox. They weren't residents. They were the contractors. I threw open the truck door, grabbed my wallet, and practically sprinted across the street to the nearest gas station. I bought 2 massive, toxic-looking energy drinks and the biggest, most grease-stained breakfast burrito sitting under the heat lamps. I hurried back just as the lead technician was unlocking the gray electrical panel mounted next to the gate. "Rough morning?" I asked, strolling up and handing him a freezing cold energy drink. The tech, a burly guy with a name tag that said Sal, looked at the can, looked at me, and narrowed his eyes. "You a resident?" "Yeah," I said, holding out the burrito. "Slept in my truck right over there. Your gate locked me out." Sal's eyes softened. He snatched the burrito and the drink. Man, I'm so sorry. I told the guy, what's his name, Dick? Richard, I nodded. Right, Dick. I told him we weren't done, Sal said, tearing into the foil wrapper. We didn't even finish the secondary loop wiring, but he was out here yesterday afternoon, literally screaming at my crew, said he wanted it locked down by 5 p.m. sharp. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Sounds like Richard, I said, leaning casually against the brick pillar. Hey, out of curiosity, this was a pretty fast install, right? Did he actually wait for the city to pull the permits for this beast? Sal stopped chewing. He looked at the gate, then looked at me. He let out a loud, raspy laugh that quickly turned into a violent coughing fit as a piece of tortilla went down the wrong pipe. He pounded his chest, taking a huge gulp of the energy drink. Permits? Sal wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. Buddy, this guy bought the hardware off a defunct storage facility in Phoenix. He hired us cash under the table to pour the concrete and wire it up. There ain't a single piece of paper on file with the city for this thing. Bingo. The smoking gun. It was handed right to me, wrapped in a gas station burrito. Is that right? I said, keeping my face perfectly neutral. Good to know. Hey, keep the change. I walked back to my truck, just as a resident from the inside of the neighborhood pulled up in a pristine white Lexus. As the gate slowly swung outward to let them exit, I seized my window. I hit the gas, slipped the truck right through the opening, and drove straight to my house. I didn't sleep. I didn't care how tired I was anymore. I took a scalding hot shower, brewed a pot of coffee so strong it could dissolve a spoon, and sat down at my computer. It was time to hit the books. Now, when most people want to fight their homeowners association, they go straight to the CCNRs, the bylaws. They look for rules about paint colors and voting quorums. But that's amateur hour. If you really want to destroy an HOA, you don't look at their rules. You look at the rules that govern them. You look at the city code. More specifically, you look at the fire code. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the Scottsdale Municipal Code and went straight for the heavy artillery, the International Fire Code, IFC. I scrolled through pages of dense, bureaucratic legal jargon until I found exactly what I was looking for. Section 503.6. Security Gates. I read it out loud to my empty living room. The installation of security gates across a fire apparatus access road shall be approved by the fire code official. Where security gates are installed, they shall have an approved means of emergency operation. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my bloodstream like rocket fuel. I kept scrolling. Section 506.1.1. Locks. An approved lock shall be installed on gates or similar barriers. To allow immediate access for emergency responders, the gate must be equipped with a Knox box key switch, an SOS siren sensor, and an automatic fail-safe egress system in the event of power failure. I sat back in my chair and smiled. A slow, predatory smile. Richard didn't just build a gate without a permit. By skipping the city inspections, he failed to install a Knox box. He failed to install an optical siren sensor. He failed to install a power loss failsafe. Legally speaking, according to the fire marshal, that wasn't a security gate at the front of our neighborhood. It was a massive, illegal, life-threatening barricade blocking a designated fire lane. I had the legal nuke. Now, I just needed to set the trap. I couldn't just call the city and say, I think it's illegal. I needed undeniable, documented proof that Richard was actively and knowingly circumventing emergency access protocols. I needed him to put his own arrogance in writing. I opened a blank email draft and addressed it to the HOA board's official email, CCing Richard directly. I cracked my knuckles. It was time for a little malicious compliance. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. I mean, honestly, trying to write a polite email to a guy you literally just want to trap inside a porta-potty and roll down a steep hill takes a monumental amount of physical restraint. My fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly from the sheer, unadulterated combination of sleep deprivation and caffeine. I took a deep, shaky breath. I had to channel my inner helpless resident. I needed to sound like a confused, slightly anxious, completely harmless suburbanite who just didn't understand the complexities of modern security. I couldn't tip my hand. If I came out swinging with city codes and legal threats, Richard would immediately clam up, call the HOA lawyer, and suddenly this whole thing would be tied up in civil court for the next 3 years. No, I needed him to willingly, enthusiastically dig his own grave, and then proudly show me the shovel. "Dear Richard," I typed out, forcing myself to use the absolute most passive-aggressive, overly polite corporate tone imaginable. "Thank you so much for all your hard work on the new front gate system. It honestly looks very secure, and I know keeping the neighborhood safe is a big job. I guess I'm just a little confused about one minor detail regarding the hardware. Since all the old clickers are currently disabled, and there doesn't seem to be a manual override lever that I can see on the inside track, I was just wondering what happens if, like, an ambulance or a fire truck needs to get in during an emergency. I didn't see one of those red Knox boxes for the fire department on the pedestal. Just wanting to make sure we are all fully compliant and safe. Thanks so much for your time." I read it over twice. It was perfect. It was sickeningly sweet, totally non-threatening, and asked a direct, highly specific operational question. I hit send. I knew Richard. I knew his type down to the marrow of his bones. He was absolutely sitting at his faux mahogany desk in the clubhouse right now, aggressively monitoring the HOA inbox like a hawk watching a field mouse, just waiting for someone to complain so he could flex his microscopic amount of authority. I didn't even have to wait 5 minutes. My phone pinged with a new email notification. I opened it, and I swear, I literally had to cover my mouth to stop myself from laughing out loud. It was a masterpiece. It was a Mona Lisa of suburban arrogance. "To all concerned residents," the email started, because of course he CC'd the entire neighborhood email list just to publicly shame me for daring to question him. "Security is, and always will be, the absolute top priority of this board. The new fortress-level gate is fully operational. Regarding emergency services, there is absolutely no need for concern or for residents to play armchair engineer. If an ambulance or fire engine needs to access the property, they can utilize the standard guest keypad, like everyone else, and enter the temporary vendor code. We do not need outdated, easily compromised physical key boxes attached to our new system. Stop causing unnecessary trouble and pick up your new secure fob at the clubhouse." I sat back in my chair. I read the email again. Then I read it a third time, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from the lack of sleep. He had actually put it in writing. He had broadcasted to 75 different households that he purposely chose not to install a Knox box, and that his official, board-approved emergency response plan was to make a fire truck stop, put it in park, have a firefighter get out in full turnout gear, walk up to a keypad, and type in a temporary vendor PIN code. I hit print. The mechanical whir of my cheap inkjet printer spitting out that single sheet of paper sounded like a symphony of pure, unadulterated victory. I grabbed the warm paper, folded it neatly, and slid it into my back pocket. I guess it was time to go buy my new fob. The Desert Mirage Estates clubhouse was exactly what you would expect. It was a sad, single-story stucco building that smelled permanently of heavily chlorinated pool water, stale potpourri, and despair. I walked through the glass double doors at exactly 10:15 a.m. The air conditioning was cranked down to what felt like absolute zero. To my left, A corkboard was plastered with aggressively highlighted, laminated signs reminding people that pool hours ended at 8 p.m. sharp, and that guests were strictly forbidden from bringing glass containers, loud music, or joy onto the premises. And there, sitting behind a folding plastic table at the far end of the room, was Richard. He was wearing perfectly pressed khaki shorts, a crisp white polo shirt tucked in entirely too tight, a braided leather belt, and yes, his signature mirrored aviator sunglasses. Indoors, in a room with the blinds drawn. He looked up as I approached, his reflection staring back at me from his own face. "Well, well," Richard said, leaning back in his folding chair and steepling his fingers together like he was a James Bond villain operating out of a strip mall. "If it isn't our most vocal critic, here to finally get with the program?" "Honestly, Richard, I just want to be able to get into my house after working a 14-hour shift," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I pulled my wallet out. "I need a fob. $150, right?" "Exact change only," he said, tapping a small metal cash box sitting on the table. As per the memo. I pulled out a crisp $100 bill and a 50, sliding them across the plastic table. Richard snatched them up, held them up to the fluorescent lights to check for watermarks, because, there's a huge counterfeit ring operating out of the Scottsdale suburbs, and then tossed them into the box. He pulled a cheap, black plastic key fob out of a cardboard box and slid it toward me. "There you go," he said, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Welcome to a secure community." I picked up the fob. It weighed almost nothing. It was identical to a $3 generic RFID tag you could buy in bulk off the internet. "Thanks. Hey, I got your email, by the way. The one you sent to the whole neighborhood." Richard puffed out his chest a little bit. "Good. I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. Transparency is key to leadership." "Right. Totally," I said, leaning in just a fraction. I was just curious. I was talking to Sal, the contractor, this morning. He said you guys really rushed the job. He said something about the secondary loop wiring not even being finished. It just made me wonder, did the city fire inspector sign off on this keypad protocol you came up with? Richard's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but his ego quickly overrode any sense of caution. He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "The city bureaucracy moves at a snail's pace. If we waited for every pencil pusher at City Hall to stamp a piece of paper, we'd be leaving ourselves vulnerable to crime for months." I took executive action. The board gave me discretionary authority over the security budget, and I used it. It's private property. The city doesn't dictate how we secure our own roads. I stared at him. He really, truly believed that. He literally thought that putting a gate on an HOA road somehow created a sovereign nation immune to municipal fire codes. It was breathtaking. "So, just to be crystal clear," I said, speaking slowly and deliberately, memorizing every single word of this interaction. "There are no permits, no city inspection. And your official stance is that emergency services have to use a PIN code?" "My official stance," Richard said, standing up and leaning over the table, trying to use his height to intimidate me, "is that you have your fob, and you need to stop asking questions and let me do the job you elected me to do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual residents to assist." There was literally no one else in the room. "Have a great day, Richard," I said, smiling genuinely for the first time in 24 hours. I walked out of the clubhouse, stepped into the blazing Arizona heat, and got back into my truck. I turned the engine on, blasted the AC, and pulled my phone out of my pocket. I didn't drive away. I sat right there in the parking lot, staring at the clubhouse doors, and pulled up the web browser. I searched for the Scottsdale Fire Department. I bypassed the emergency 911 number. I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't going to tie up emergency dispatch for a code violation, and found the administrative office number. I tapped the screen. It rang twice. "Scottsdale Fire Department Administration, this is Brenda," a woman's voice answered. sounding pleasant but busy, with the faint sound of radio chatter in the background. "Hi, Brenda," I said, putting on my most serious, concerned citizen voice. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure who I need to speak to, but I need to report an immediate Code Red entrapment hazard and a severe violation of the International Fire Code regarding a blocked primary fire apparatus access road." The typing in the background instantly stopped. "Okay, sir. Can I have your name and the address of the hazard?" I gave her my name, and I gave her the address of the brand-new, matte black iron gates guarding Desert Mirage Estates. The HOA president installed a fortress-style swing gate across the only entrance to our neighborhood last night. It was installed completely without permits. It has no manual override, it has no power loss fail-safe, and most importantly, it does not have a Knox box or an optical siren sensor. "Hold on. Let me make sure I am understanding you correctly," Brenda said, her voice dropping an octave, the pleasant customer service tone completely vanishing. "Are you saying there is a locked motorized gate across a residential street with no emergency override?" "That is exactly what I am saying," I replied. "And I actually emailed the HOA president about it this morning to ask how a fire engine would get in. He replied to the entire neighborhood in writing, stating that emergency responders are expected to pull up to the call box and type in a temporary vendor PIN code." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could literally hear Brenda processing the sheer, unfathomable stupidity of that statement. He wants a fire engine to use a vendor PIN code?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I have it printed out in my pocket," I confirmed. "Sir, please hold," Brenda said. "I am transferring you directly to the on-duty fire marshal." The line clicked, and hold music started playing, some terrible royalty-free jazz tune. It played for exactly 10 seconds before the line clicked again. "Marshal Miller," a deep, gravelly voice barked. It was the kind of voice that commanded respect, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who had pulled people out of burning buildings and had zero patience for bureaucratic nonsense. "Marshal Miller, my name is—" "Brenda just gave me the rundown," Miller interrupted, cutting straight to the chase. "You live at Desert Mirage Estates?" "Yes, sir, just inside the main entrance." "And you have a documented email from the property manager or HOA president stating he bypassed fire code and expects my trucks to use a keypad?" "Printed and in my pocket right now," I said, along with a verbal confirmation I got from him 5 minutes ago that he didn't pull any permits for the installation. I heard the heavy sound of a chair scraping against the floor, followed by the jingle of keys. "Where are you right now?" Miller asked. "I'm sitting in my truck in the clubhouse parking lot, about 200 yards from the gate. Drive to the gate. Park your truck on the inside. Wait for me. I am leaving my office right now, and I will be there in 12 minutes. "Yes, sir," I said, but he had already hung up. I put my truck in drive, rolled out of the clubhouse parking lot, and cruised down to the front entrance. I parked on the side of the road, just inside the perimeter, facing outward through the heavy iron bars. The sun was absolutely punishing, beating down on the black metal of the gate, making it radiate heat like an oven. I rolled my windows down, turned the radio off, and just sat there in the quiet, watching the street. Exactly 11 minutes later, a massive, bright red Chevy Tahoe turned the corner. It had no sirens blaring, but the hidden strobe lights in the grille and the light bar on the roof were flashing aggressively, a silent but highly visible warning that authority had arrived. The side of the SUV read, "Scottsdale Fire Department, Fire Marshal," in bold, reflective gold lettering. The Tahoe pulled up tight to the outside of the gate, stopping about 2 feet away from the heavy iron doors. The driver's side door slammed open, and Marshal Miller stepped out. He was a tank of a human being. He looked to be in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair, a thick, bristly mustache, and a perfectly pressed white uniform shirt adorned with badges and brass collar pins. He wore heavy black station boots that crunched against the asphalt as he walked. He had a heavy radio clipped to his belt that was constantly chattering with dispatch traffic, and he carried a thick metal clipboard in his left hand. He didn't even look at me at first. He walked straight up to the gate. He grabbed 2 of the thick iron bars and shook them violently. The heavy motors hummed slightly under the strain, but the gate didn't budge. It was locked solid. Then he walked over to the freshly poured concrete pedestal holding the call box. He leaned down, inspecting it closely. He looked on the top. He looked on the sides. He walked around to the back. I got out of my truck and walked up to the inside of the gate. "Marshal Miller?" He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took me in. "You the caller?" "Yes, sir," I said. Miller pointed a thick, calloused finger at the pedestal. "Where is the Knox box?" "There isn't one," I replied, shaking my head. He looked up at the top of the brick pillars framing the entrance, his eyes scanning for the small, white optical sensor that detects the strobe pattern of emergency vehicle lights and automatically triggers the gate to open. "Where is the siren sensor?" "I literally don't think they bought one," I said. "The contractor told me they bought the hardware used from a defunct storage unit facility." Miller let out a slow, furious breath through his nose. His mustache twitched. He pulled a radio mic from his shoulder. "Dispatch, Marshal Unit 1. I am on scene at Desert Mirage Estates, confirming a total obstruction of a primary fire lane. No emergency access infrastructure present." "Copy that, Unit 1," the radio crackled back. Miller let go of the mic and looked at me through the iron bars. "You said you had something in writing." I reached into my back pocket, unfolded the printout of Richard's email, and slipped it through the gap in the metal bars. Miller took it. He put on a pair of silver reading glasses he pulled from his breast pocket and read the email. I watched his face. It was honestly a fascinating physiological transition. I watched the skin of his neck turn pink, then red, and then a deep, mottled shade of purple that crept all the way up to his ears. The veins on his forehead physically bulged. I had never seen a human being radiate such an intense, contained level of pure fury. He read the line aloud, his voice practically shaking. "If an ambulance or fire engine needs to access the property, they can utilize the standard guest keypad like everyone else." He slowly took his glasses off, folded them, and put them back in his pocket. He looked at the gate, then he looked at the call box, and then he looked back at me. "Who is Richard?" Miller asked, his voice dead calm, which was somehow far more terrifying than if he had been yelling. "He's the HOA president," I said, pointing back down the street. "He's sitting in the clubhouse right now, about 2 blocks that way." "Is he really?" Miller said, a dark, dangerous look flashing in his eyes. "Yeah," I nodded. "He's selling the new fobs for $150 a pop." Miller didn't say another word. He turned around, walked back to his red Tahoe, and opened the rear hatch. I watched as he bypassed the fire extinguishers, the medical kits, and the traffic cones. He reached into a large, heavy-duty black toolbox and pulled out a pair of bright yellow, 3-foot-long bolt cutters. Then he grabbed a length of thick, hardened steel chain and an enormous, heavy-duty master lock padlock. He slammed the hatch shut. He walked back to the gate, holding the bolt cutters casually in one hand like they were a baseball bat. "Sir," Miller said to me, his tone entirely professional, completely devoid of emotion, "I need you to back your vehicle up 50 feet and remain entirely clear of the gate swing path." "You got it," I said, practically sprinting back to my truck. I threw it in reverse, backed up well out of the way, and put it in park. I wasn't going to miss a single second of this. Marshal Miller walked up to the center of the heavy iron gates. He didn't look at the call box. He didn't try to pry the doors open. He looked directly at the massive motorized actuator arm connecting the left gate to the brick pillar. He raised the 3-foot bolt cutters, clamped the hardened steel jaws directly onto the thick hydraulic pin holding the actuator arm in place, and squeezed the handles together with all his weight. There was a loud, sharp crack that echoed down the quiet suburban street like a gunshot. The metal pin sheared completely in half. The heavy iron gate, suddenly disconnected from its locking motor, sagged forward an inch. Miller moved to the right side and repeated the process. Another sharp crack echoed through the air. The second pin sheared. He tossed the bolt cutters onto the grass. He grabbed the center of the massive gates and threw his weight backward. With a horrible metallic groaning sound, the heavy iron doors swung wide open, completely exposing the entrance to the neighborhood. They were completely disconnected from the motors, swaying loosely on their hinges. I sat in my truck, absolutely mesmerized. It was beautiful. Miller didn't stop there. He dragged the left gate all the way open until it was flush against the brick perimeter wall. He took the heavy steel chain, wrapped it tightly around the iron bars of the gate and the brick pillar, and snapped the massive master lock shut, securing the gate in the permanently open position. He did the same exact thing to the right side. Then he walked back to his Tahoe, opened the passenger door, and pulled out a large, neon-orange sticker that was easily 2 feet wide. He walked over to the shiny new control pedestal, peeled the backing off the sticker, and slapped it directly over the keypad screen, smoothing it down with his hand so it was impossible to remove without a heat gun and a razor blade. From where I was sitting, I could clearly read the bold black letters on the orange background. Condemned, do not operate. By order of the Scottsdale Fire Marshal. Miller stepped back, brushed his hands on his pants, and picked up his radio mic. Dispatch, Unit 1. The obstruction at Desert Mirage Estates has been neutralized. The primary access lane is now secured in the open position. Send a patrol unit to my location for crowd control, please. I am about to make contact with the property manager. Copy that, Unit 1. Patrol unit is en route. Miller clipped the mic back to his shoulder. He looked at me, standing by my truck, and gave me a single, crisp nod. Then, he turned his attention down the street, looking exactly in the direction of the clubhouse. Right on cue, I saw a golf cart aggressively speeding down the road. It was swerving wildly, the electric motor whining in protest as the driver floored it. It was Richard. He had obviously gotten an alert on his phone that the gate had been forced open, or he was watching the security camera feed from his little makeshift command center. He was clutching his clipboard to his chest, his aviator sunglasses glinting in the sun, his face twisted in absolute outrage. He slammed the brakes on the golf cart, skidding to a halt about 10 feet from the newly chained gates. He practically jumped out, ignoring me completely, and stormed directly toward Marshal Miller, waving his clipboard like a weapon. "Hey!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking with indignation. "Hey, what do you think you are doing? Who authorized you to damage private community property? Do you have any idea how much those actuators cost? This is a highly secure perimeter, and you are trespassing." Marshal Miller didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, a mountain of a man in a crisp white shirt, radiating absolute, unyielding authority. He let Richard finish his little tantrum, letting the words hang in the hot, dead air of the afternoon. "Are you Richard?" Miller asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I am the president of this homeowners association," Richard yelled, pointing a finger at Miller's chest. "And I demand your badge number. You're going to be paying for this, buddy. My board lawyer is going to have a field day with you." Miller slowly reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out his reading glasses, put them on, and then reached into his other pocket. He pulled out the folded printout of Richard's email. He unfolded it deliberately, smoothing it out with his large hands. "Richard," Miller said, his voice echoing slightly off the brick walls. "My name is Fire Marshal Miller. I am the Chief Code Enforcement Officer for the Scottsdale Fire Department, and I am holding a document, authored by you, in which you explicitly instruct emergency services to halt their response to a life safety event, exit their apparatus, and input a vendor PIN code to access a primary fire lane. Richard froze. He looked at the piece of paper in Miller's hand. He looked at the neon orange condemnation sticker on his precious keypad. He looked at the heavy steel chains locking his gates open. For the first time since I had met him, the smug, arrogant aura surrounding him completely vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, hard realization that he had just kicked a hornet's nest with bare feet. Now, Miller continued, taking a step forward, completely invading Richard's personal space, forcing the HOA president to instinctively take a step back. You are going to stand exactly where you are, and you are going to listen to me very carefully, because the next words out of your mouth are going to determine whether or not you are leaving this property in the back of a police cruiser. I leaned against the side of my truck, crossed my arms, and smiled. I mean, honestly, this was better than any movie I had ever seen. The trap hadn't just worked. It had caught the biggest, most arrogant rat in the neighborhood, and the trap was currently wearing a badge and holding a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. Richard's mouth opened and closed a few times, like a guppy that had suddenly found itself on the carpeting. He looked at the email in Miller's hand, then up at Miller's face, trying to find a trace of bluff. There was none. Miller was a stone wall of municipal authority. I am just trying to protect the property values, Richard finally stammered, his voice dropping an entire octave, the shrill indignation completely evaporating. There have been break-ins 2 neighborhoods over. We needed a secure perimeter. The board voted on it. I don't care if the Supreme Court voted on it, Miller said, taking another step forward. You installed an unpermitted, non-compliant, heavy-duty mechanical barricade across a designated fire apparatus access road. You failed to install a Knox box. You failed to install an optical strobe sensor. You failed to wire a power loss failsafe. Under Section 503.6 of the International Fire Code, this is an illegal obstruction. Under Section 506.1. 1. Your lack of emergency access hardware is a direct threat to life safety. Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his tight polo collar. Okay, look, we can just... I'll call the contractor. We can get the box installed. Today. You didn't have to destroy the actuators. Those are $10,000 motors. I didn't destroy them, Richard, Miller said calmly, though the edge in his voice was razor sharp. I bypassed them to eliminate an immediate life safety hazard. Because if one of your residents inside this perimeter suffers a myocardial infarction, and my heavy rescue engine has to stop, park, and have a firefighter punch in a vendor code on a keypad while someone's brain is deprived of oxygen for an extra 90 seconds, that blood is on your hands. And mine. And I don't let civilians dictate my response times. Just then, a black and white Scottsdale PD cruiser rolled up, its lights flashing, pulling in right behind Miller's Tahoe. The same 2 cops from the night before, the tired veteran and the gum-chewing rookie, stepped out. The veteran cop took one look at the chained open gates, the neon orange condemnation sticker, Marshal Miller standing like a colossus, and me leaning against my truck with a giant, stupid grin on my face. He let out a long, heavy sigh. Marshal Miller, what do we got? Officer, Miller said, not taking his eyes off Richard. We have an illegal, unpermitted barricade blocking a fire lane. I have secured the obstruction in the open position. I need you to inform this individual of the consequences if he attempts to remove those chains or operate this gate before the city completes a full inspection. The older cop walked up to Richard, hooking his thumbs into his belt exactly like he had done with me 12 hours earlier. All right, sir. You heard the Marshal. Those chains stay exactly where they are. If you cut them, if you tamper with the padlock, or if you try to reactivate those motors, you will be placed under arrest for obstructing emergency services and tampering with a fire lane. Do you understand? Richard looked like he was about to physically be sick. His pristine aviators had slid down his nose, revealing wide, panicked eyes. Yes, I understand. Good, Miller said, pulling his heavy metal clipboard up and clicking a pen. Because right now, I am writing the HOA a citation for unpermitted construction, which carries a fine of $1,000 per day until the structure is brought into full compliance. I am also issuing a citation for creating a life safety hazard. You are officially on notice. Have a contractor, a licensed one, who pulls actual city permits. Contact my office. Miller tore the thick yellow carbon copy citation off his clipboard and shoved it directly into Richard's chest. Richard reflexively grabbed it, clutching it like it was radioactive. Have a wonderful afternoon, Miller said, completely deadpan. He turned around, walked back to his Tahoe, and got in. The police officers gave Richard a final, stern look, got back in their cruiser, and slowly drove away. Richard just stood there in the middle of the entrance, holding his citation, staring blankly at the chained-open gates. The sun beat down on him. The silence of the neighborhood was deafening. I pushed myself off my truck, walked over to him, and pulled the cheap, black plastic key fob out of my pocket. I tossed it, underhand, right at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the hot asphalt. "Hey, Richard," I said, my voice dripping with absolute, unapologetic, petty vindication. "I guess I won't be needing that. But thanks for keeping us secure." I got in my truck, put it in drive, and rolled right past him, through the wide-open gates, and finally went home to get some actual sleep. But honestly, the story didn't just end there. Because when you nuke an HOA's pet project, the radioactive fallout is just spectacularly messy. I slept for 12 straight hours. When I finally woke up, the neighborhood group chat and the community Facebook page were an absolute dumpster fire of chaos, confusion, and panic. Apparently, someone had taken a picture of the neon orange condemnation sticker and the giant steel chains and posted it online with the caption, "Did we get raided?" Richard, in full panic mode, had completely ghosted everyone. The clubhouse was locked. He wasn't answering emails. He was hiding in his McMansion, probably staring at the yellow citation and realizing that the HOA was bleeding $1,000 a day because of his little executive action. It took exactly 3 days for the financial reality to crush him. On Thursday morning, I was drinking my coffee on my front porch when I heard the familiar rumble of a heavy diesel engine. I looked down the street, and sure enough, that same dented white utility van pulled up to the front gates. I grabbed my keys and walked down there. Sal, the lead technician, was standing in front of the condemned control box, scratching his head and looking at the heavy master lock chaining the gates open. "Hey, Sal," I called out. He turned around, his eyes widening when he saw me. He let out a loud, barking laugh. "Buddy, you actually did it! You called the fire marshal!" "I told you I was locked out," I shrugged, smiling. "So what's the damage?" Sal shook his head, pulling a thick folder out of his van. "Oh man, it is a bloodbath. Dick called my boss yesterday, literally crying on the phone. The city is fining them $1,000 a day. My boss told him the only way we touch this thing again is if he signs a new contract at double-time emergency rates and pays up front." "Double time?" I whistled. "What does that look like for a job this botched?" Sal flipped open the folder and showed me the invoice. My jaw practically hit the pavement. "First," Sal explained, pointing a thick, calloused finger at the line items, "we have to rip out the entire control board because the one he bought used isn't compatible with a municipal Knox box or an optical strobe sensor system. That's $5,000 just for the new brain. Then we have to trench a new conduit line across the street to wire in the SOS siren sensor on the other brick pillar. That's another $3,000 in labor and concrete patching. Then there's the Knox box itself, the permits, the city inspection fees, and our emergency rush fee. I looked at the grand total at the bottom of the page. It was $22,450. "Sal," I said, barely containing my laughter, "you guys are going to bankrupt the HOA." "Hey man, he wanted it fast and cheap," Sal grinned. "Now he gets it slow and incredibly expensive. We can't even start work until the city approves the new permit application, which takes at least 2 weeks, so that $1,000 a day fine is going to keep ticking." By the time the city finally approved the permits and Sal's crew finished the job, the Desert Mirage Estates HOA was in the hole for nearly $45,000 between the contractor fees and the fire marshal's fines. And this is where Richard made his final, fatal mistake. Instead of admitting fault, instead of resigning in disgrace, Richard decided he was going to try and quietly pass the bill on to the residents. 2 weeks later, every single homeowner received a certified letter in the mail. It was a notice of a special assessment. Richard and his 2 cronies on the board had voted to instantly levy a one-time fee of $600 per household to cover unforeseen infrastructure upgrades mandated by the city. He tried to spin it. He tried to make it sound like the city had arbitrarily changed the rules and forced his hand. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the letter, and I just shook my head. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Almost. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the official City Public Records portal. Because I was the one who initiated the complaint, I had the exact case number from Marshal Miller. I requested a copy of the official Fire Marshal incident report. It cost me $3 and took 20 minutes to get the PDF emailed to me. It was a beautiful document. It detailed exactly what time Miller arrived, exactly what codes were violated, and most importantly, it included a direct quote from Richard's email stating that emergency services should use a vendor PIN code. It explicitly stated that the HOA president knowingly bypassed the permitting process. I didn't just post it on the Facebook group. That was too easy to delete. I printed out 75 copies of the fire marshal's report. I bought a box of bright red envelopes. I put a copy of the report, along with a copy of Richard's special assessment letter, into every single envelope. Then I spent my entire Saturday walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors and handing them directly to my neighbors. "Hey," I would say to Brenda or Steve or Gary, "did you see that $600 bill Richard sent us for the gate? You might want to read the actual police and fire report on why we got fined. He built it illegally, got caught by the fire department, and now he wants us to pay for his fines." The neighborhood practically spontaneously combusted. You can mess with people's paint colors. You can tell them their grass is too long. But when you try to reach into the wallets of 75 heavily mortgaged suburbanites to pay for your own documented incompetence, you start a riot. Within 48 hours, the HOA inbox was flooded with threats of lawsuits. A petition to recall the entire board, starting with Richard, garnered 60 signatures in a single afternoon. We only needed 40 to force an emergency general meeting. The emergency meeting was held the following Tuesday night in the clubhouse. It was standing room only. The air conditioning couldn't keep up with the body heat and the sheer, palpable rage radiating from the crowd. Richard sat at the front folding table, flanking his 2 board members, sweating profusely. He had ditched the aviators. He looked small. He looked terrified. I stood in the back, leaning against the wall, sipping a lukewarm bottle of water. A guy named Gary, a retired structural engineer who lived 3 doors down from me, took the floor. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just calmly laid out the bylaws, the state laws regarding fiduciary duty, and read verbatim from the fire marshal's report. "Richard," Gary said, his voice echoing in the packed room, "you didn't just violate city code. You violated your fiduciary duty to this community by engaging in unpermitted, illegal construction that resulted in massive financial penalties. You acted outside the scope of your authority. You endangered the lives of the residents by blocking emergency access, and then you attempted to fraudulently pass the penalties of your own illegal actions onto us. Richard leaned into his microphone, his voice shaking. I was acting in the best interests of security. The board has discretionary— The board does not have discretionary authority to break the law, Gary interrupted sharply. And the board certainly doesn't have the authority to levy a special assessment to cover city fines incurred by gross negligence. The vote wasn't even close. It was a massacre. Richard was recalled from his position as president by a vote of 72-3. The other two board members immediately resigned on the spot, rather than face their own recall votes. Gary was elected as the interim president, and his first official act, voted on unanimously by the room, was to formally reject the special assessment and initiate a small claims lawsuit against Richard personally to recoup the $45,000 in fines and contractor fees, citing extreme breach of fiduciary duty. Richard practically ran out of the clubhouse. He didn't look at anyone. He just put his head down and scurried out the glass double doors into the hot Arizona night. A few months later, the dust finally settled. The neighborhood was quiet again. The massive, matte black iron gates are still there at the front of the neighborhood, but they look a little different now. There is a bright red, heavy-duty Knox box bolted to the brick pillar. There is a white optical strobe sensor mounted high above the entrance, silently waiting for the flash of a fire engine's light bar. And most importantly, the gates actually work. When you pull up, they swing open smoothly, quietly, and entirely legally. I never did buy one of Richard's $150 key fobs. The new board, under Gary's leadership, realized they had a massive surplus of the cheap generic tags Richard had bought. They reprogrammed the system, linked the fobs to the new control board, and mailed 2 of them to every single household for free. Sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night after a long shift, I pull up to that gate. I grab the little plastic fob off my sun visor, I press the button, and I watch those heavy iron doors swing open. And every single time, I look at that shiny red Knox box, and I can't help but smile, because they tried to lock me out, so I made sure they could never close the door again.